Hello, OIS podcast audience. Welcome to yet another episode of the Rob and Jay Show. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rob Rothman. I am a practicing glaucoma specialist. Practice in New York, taking care of referral, complicated cataract and glaucoma patients. I do that about 50% of the time, and the remainder of my time is spent managing InFocus Capital Partners, which is an ophthalmology-specific venture capital fund that has fully invested its first fund, is currently navigating those assets. We've had our first exit within the past few weeks, and now looking forward to hopefully raising a second fund. And then I spend a couple of hours every once in a while hanging out with Jay doing podcasts.
Yeah. This is our ninth or 10th one, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So my name is Jay. I think some of you know me, and I'm an anterior segment surgeon in northern New Jersey. I teach here at the New York Eye and Ear Infirmary of Mount Sinai School of Medicine.
Yeah.
And I do practice ophthalmology and eye care. I also spend a lot of time with the industry. I have a couple of C-suite roles and innovation as chief commercial officer also at Nordic Pharma. But I also do quite a bit of private equity. I do like entrepreneurship. I love innovation. And I love being here on this podcast with you, Rob.
But,
It's been a good journey.
Some people don't know this, and maybe even our guest doesn't know this today, but Jay and I met, I don't know, like a couple of days into college, right?
We were both 18 years old.
Yeah. So we went to college and med school together, same program, and have remained friends, unfortunately for Jay, since that time. So it goes back quite a long ways.
We're not Siamese twins, despite the way this looks here, but we are close.
We definitely have different mothers and different fathers. Yeah. So clearly not really. Anyway, we are privileged today to have another person who is committed to bringing forth necessary treatment for ophthalmology patients, who is working with a company that will hopefully help us begin to tackle in a meaningful way the problem of presbyopia. And we'll discuss a little bit of that in a few minutes. But Paul Smith, President and COO of Orasis, thank you for taking the time today to speak to Jay and I. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast, and looking forward to hearing, all about Qlosi and Orasis's journey. So thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
Thanks, gentlemen. It's a pleasure. Rob, Jay, thanks for the opportunity to visit, and looking forward to the conversation.
So I think one of the things, and this has been kind of a routine for me with these podcasts over the years, is to try and get a little bit of background for the audience regarding, you and how you ended up where you're at, what the journey was for you to end up at Orasis, and, kind of how you get there. I was mentioning to Jay before that I get a lot of feedback from these podcasts, and, 80% of it is positive, which I think is pretty good. And one of the questions that comes up a lot is from people who are trying to get into the business of ophthalmology. They ask, well, who do I speak to? How do I get into this? And I said, just listen to my podcast, right? Because when you listen to the podcast, you'll hear people who have been successful in ophthalmology explain to you kind of how they got where they're going. And you should listen to them, because I don't really know how I ended up where I am. And I think that if you, listen to people like you who've been truly successful, that, it'll be helpful. So if you can share some insights with the audience regarding your educational background, where you went, how you ended up here.
Wait. This week is a great sport week in basketball, in college basketball. And you and I are thrilled with the Final Four. I went to business school there, and you have an...
Don't say where it is yet.
And you have an amazing son.
I won't say where it is.
But, Paul, who you have? Who's your horse in this Final Four? And it better be right, because we agree on what's right.
Well, if the standard is where you went to business school, then the decision's already made for me. I did get my MBA at the University of Florida, so go Gators.
Oh, okay.
Well, there you go. So thanks for being on the podcast, Paul. See, it's been a pleasure having you. We're both obviously rooting for Duke, unfortunately.
Of course.
And we're used to being hated, so it goes well with our personalities. That's right. But anyway, thanks for that. All right, so back to you. Tell us your story.
Yes, I appreciate that. So in terms of education, when I began undergrad, obviously many years ago, I think like a lot of people, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to be an engineer, and went to University of Central Florida, which had a great computer engineering program. I figured out pretty quickly that that wasn't what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, and pivoted and found my way into the School of Communication there, and was really drawn to journalism in public relations, which I pursued. And after a series of internships, found out I was drawn to advertising, which I think, the things that attracted me to it was the variety, the pace, problem solving, tackling strategic issues, and really, coming out of that, there's an element of sales that's inherent in all of those things. And upon graduation, found myself in a technology sales role. So sort of a combination of my passion for technology and things that I really enjoyed in terms of, work and tackling different challenges. And so I've spent a few years in technology sales, which included a couple of startups, which didn't have happy endings. And that, as we know, that's often the case for many startups. In fact, more than 90% of them don't make it, as we know, but learned a ton along the way, and was looking for a field that, I had a future, was stable, and was fortunate to land a role with Alcon in sales in 2002. And so that is actually the beginning of my eye care journey. And at the time, Alcon was booming really in every category. I started in the pharma business at Alcon. And I think, one of the things that I learned being in the field, working as a rep, getting to know folks like yourselves and understanding really the plight of the patient, the operating reality of ophthalmology and optometry, was just really attracted to that dynamic. And the other thing that I think became evident even early in my career is that the cadence of innovation in eye care was unique. And, as I looked around and I saw how quickly, we could iterate, or we could be responsive to your needs as doctors or patient needs, sometimes with incremental innovation, sometimes with disruptive innovation, but it all happened really quickly, which is something I really liked. And so that was really my first foray into the eye care space. Now, those who had, I think, the good fortune of being in the industry at that time, regardless of where you went to school, so to speak, we learned a ton, and the companies were really, I think, focused on developing talent, developing leaders. And so I consider it to be really fortunate that that's where I landed. While I was at Alcon, went back to business school, and ultimately, learned about, I think, many other aspects of the business we were in. I had very little finance education or marketing education in undergrad, and ultimately found my way into a marketing role. And my first job as a product manager was in glaucoma. So certainly share that in common. And very quickly in that first role, I had an opportunity to launch my first product. And so I think, if I were counseling somebody who's either getting into eye care or looking to get into eye care, what are the types of things that really accelerate learning and the potential for growth and enterprise leadership? I think marketing is without question a major opportunity there, because, managing a brand is a lot like managing a business. It's really the intersection of all the various functions in the enterprise, as well as, the needs of the customer. And so just had continued to benefit from that experience, and was drawn to product launches, many of which I did throughout my 12 years at Alcon, first in pharma, then in the consumer business, and later in medical device and Alcon surgical business, where I spent the last several years. So that was the entry point. And, now looking back more than 20 years later, it's a space that I've come to know and love. Have been in big companies, small companies, multiple startups, multinationals. And I think there's something I've been able to learn at each of those along the way. You mentioned entrepreneurship, which I think is obviously a value or an interest that you both share. And it was one that sort of bit me as well. And I left Alcon in 2014 for my first startup, which was a diagnostic company, a dry eye diagnostic company. Lots of ups and downs, tons of learning. In the end, the company was acquired by private equity, ultimately sold to Bausch & Lomb. So it has a happy ending, despite that happening some years after I left. And then following that, was recruited back to big multinational by Novartis, where I was leading eye care in the U.S. for 2 years prior to joining Orasis, now more than 4 years ago. So it's been an amazing journey. I think the things that really excite me have led me to launch products, have led me to companies and opportunities that allow me to build, to be part of, really disrupting, to build incredible teams. And that led me to, as I mentioned, where I am today with Orasis. So it's a real special space that we're in. I think the collaboration between, as I alluded to earlier, industry and the profession is really unique. I think when you look across all therapeutic areas, and if it's a technology that, first attracted me to the space, it's the people that have kept me here. I think the caliber of talent, the caliber of thinking, shared values, shared passion for, preserving and restoring vision and quality of life is just really something that I've never questioned getting up in the morning a single day in my career in terms of, being driven and working in line with my purpose. So really, really special space, and thrilled to continue to be able to contribute to it.
It's amazing, actually. I'll go ahead.
No, that's great. I was just going to say that it's a great story, and it's amazing how similar it is to the story of people who've been successful in ophthalmology. I think that when you look at the ophthalmology kind of universe, it's really like a talent sucking machine, right? Once you're a talented person and you get pulled into something in ophthalmology, it's almost like you never leave. And part of that is because there's so much opportunity, but the other part of it is that it's an enjoyable place to work. I mean, ophthalmology is an incredibly uniquely collaborative environment amongst, industry and clinicians and finance. Everybody kind of works together, and it's a little bit of a unique space. It's very rare, at least maybe you have different experiences, but to find people who have been in ophthalmology who then leave ophthalmology and don't come back.
That's right. No doubt. And your journey is absolutely amazing, Paul. Unlike us, when we came out of medical school and eventually ophthalmology training, you may leave your first job the first 1 or 2 years because things don't work out, the partnership deal, you don't have enough surgical volume, or you don't like your peers. But then your second job is usually where you stay. And most of us, and those that are giants ahead of us, right, have stayed in their practices for, 25, 30, 35, 40 years and stay there. My father was a Roche guy, came to this country from India and went to London and came here, was there for 40 years. And he prided himself on that, right? Despite the lure of going to some startups. But in your genre of leadership, and I see it time and time again at all the great meetings, you have to check the box and have done some commercials, some marketing, investor relations, or you're running a sales force, the people capital, the investment capital, but also the experience capital here. Yours is predicated on being at different places and checking the box from a corporate point of view. Sort of very different than what we do as physicians, right? You and I have branched off now because we're bored, seeing blepharitis and dry eye, 100 times a day, 5 days a week,
Right.
Or glaucoma for that matter. But in Paul's, journey with the industry, that's why I love it. You have to sort of check the box and go through different parts of that journey. May not be the best job, but you need that to be the next leader at the next company that you're going to be going to. And here you are, pretty much running the company with a really great founder and CEO in Elad. So really good story.
Yeah, I think that is all well said. I think one of the things that, that I love is I learn something every day from customers who have become partners and friends over many years, from the team around me. I think when you kind of go in with that mindset that, the last place you want to be is, in a room where you're the smartest person, and you surround yourself with people who either shine light into the blind spots that, you have as a leader or a professional, that's really exciting, and it continues to be exciting for me. So I feel very fortunate. And I think, Rob, you said it well. I don't know very many people who have found their way into eye care and left, or if they haven't come back very quickly. And I've seen that same story play out time and time again. So it really is, I think, a place that tends to attract and retain talent. And, when you look at the great schools, as I mentioned the one that I went to, and you look at, the leadership in the startup space where, a lot of innovation is, moved into, what I call the periphery over the last 10 years or so. I look at my peer group, I look at the way that, that we've learned together, the way that we still sharpen each other. And we come together in I think a spirit of collaboration and lifting each other up. And it's just, it's something really unique. And so I've always taken that approach. As long as I'm, growing faster where I am than, what I could be doing elsewhere, then I'm in a good place. And part of that is surrounding yourself with the right people.
Yep. Well, I agree. We all agree. So tell us a little bit about, what you're doing, and tell us about the company and its product, because it's important. And we want to dive into a little bit about what differentiates Qlosi from currently available products. So.
Yeah. So the origin story for Orasis is a great one. The technology was actually first developed by three ophthalmologists who were practicing in Europe, and they had noticed that there was, this sort of unmet need. This is, we're going all the way back to when, all of the corneal inlays were kind of being commercialized around the world. You had, camera and raindrop and I think, one of the things that they observed is that there was great demand among patients for an alternative to reading glasses, but there wasn't broad acceptance or broad access to the technology, in that case, which really spurred their idea around leveraging pinhole optics as a way to treat presbyopia. There was just an opportunity there in the market. And so they went down this path of formulating the original version of our product, which today is branded and approved by FDA as Qlosi. But at that point in time, it was an idea, and they iterated and eventually took their idea on the road, looking for initial seed funding, which they soon found in Sequoia Capital, which obviously is a well-known firm in the world of venture capital, private equity. And so Sequoia was our original investor. They've continued to invest in every subsequent round. So we've been very fortunate to have support from, high caliber investors and leaders. And so the partner who made that initial investment still sits on our board today. We took that, the company was founded in Israel, and Jay alluded to this a bit earlier, by Elad Kedar, who was our founding CEO and still our CEO today. An incredible person who I had the good fortune of meeting now over 4 years ago. And I think, looking at the journey that at that point, Elad was 5 years in, looking at all of the challenges that, he had faced and overcome, the number of times that they had iterated and refined and reformulated the product to get it successfully through phase 2. And at that point, we were in the middle of phase 3. So we had great confidence in the clinical outcomes, but obviously no guarantee. And so I think, you've got to be willing to accept a degree of risk, which I did. I think it means something anytime people vote with their career. But I believed in the leadership. I really connected with a lot. I think, we've got many shared values. I think a shared passion for building. I think the type of people and that we both have sought to surround ourselves with, all of that resonated with me, and said, this is somebody I could stand shoulder to shoulder with and build a company. And it's just been an amazing experience over these last 4 years, which really, from a company perspective, culminated in a really, what I'll call a milestone moment for us last week, which is when we had our launch meeting for Qlosi, which, for the first time we had an entire sales organization, leadership, account managers step into a room together and meet each other face to face in many cases for the very first time. So incredibly rewarding. I think I had these mixed emotions of it being both surreal and entirely expected, because that's what we planned to do from the beginning. But of course, the journey to get to this point is anything but simple. Obviously, we had to overcome regulatory risk, clinical risk, financial risk. We completed a Series D funding round in Q3 of last year. We closed it in September, and you guys are both well aware of what capital markets have looked like, what financial markets have looked like over the last 3 years. So we feel very fortunate. We think it is a testament to the work the team has done. We think it's a testament to the incredible unmet need in the market to treat and provide options to both providers and patients. presbyopes again who are seeking a break or an alternative to their reading glasses. And really that brings us up to present day. So we do have what we believe is really the right asset to lay the foundation to build this category and establish it so it achieves its full potential going forward. So Qlosi is now commercially available. As I mentioned, we're already into the field at scale, meeting with eye care professionals, optometrists, and ophthalmologists this week. And so that story is now being written just as we had all envisioned, and really now it's obviously our responsibility and our privilege to deliver against that aspiration.
So that's great. I mean, presbyopia, we don't look our age, but we are our age, and we both have these readers and so forth. It really ticks me off when I'm in surgery and I do my opno and pull out my readers. Presbyopia is a huge unmet need, there's no doubt, right? And there's another great company out there, a great company which we all respect. One great thing about ophthalmology and eye care is that there's a lot of respect. It's like baseball or football or even the Final Four, right? There's a lot of respect in sports and a lot of respect in eye care with the different companies. And I think we all wanted, at that time, Allergan, now AbbVie, but Allergan to win. And unfortunately, it just didn't meet what we thought would happen, in terms of, filling the unmet need. And the category is not gone. The category is dampened, right? At least a couple of years ago, right around the time of COVID and so forth. And that may have been different market conditions, but maybe the space wasn't defined, who the customers were, who the prescribers were, and so forth. So how do you learn from that, right? From a Harvard Business Case Review, how you learn on what companies do or don't do. This is a great company, right? We respect Allergan, now AbbVie, so well. And how do you learn from that in a very positive way? Because you're going to be going back to the same customers, maybe the same physicians, the same societies. And that's an important part of business, right? Sometimes being the second to market is easier than being the first to market. But then everyone's looking at you and saying, well, can you do it? So what are those challenges for you?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And, the approach we've taken from the very beginning was really outside in. I shared the origin story of the ophthalmologist that saw the need in patients. And we took the same approach from very early on, conducting really foundational market research in the early stages, understanding what the right product profile needed to deliver to really engage patients. And we placed our bets. And one of the bets that we made very early on was that this product had to deliver really across three dimensions. And they're not novel, but they're extremely important in a category like this, which, for many is a quality of life condition that we're treating. And so whereas, efficacy is always sort of the price of admission, safety and tolerability rise even higher in the hierarchy, so to speak, of decision making here. And so when we looked at that, we knew that we couldn't take a traditional approach. We couldn't formulate at the concentration that miotics, in this case pilocarpine, had been used for more than 50 years, which was 1 to 4%. In the formulations we took into phase 2 were at 0.2 and 0.4%. Again, a small fraction, 5 times less than the concentration at which pilocarpine was commonly used for glaucoma. And we believe that was the right approach. And so, again, taking that outside-in approach informed by patient research, that led us down the path of getting the right formulation, which we believe was the first and arguably most important kind of foundational decision. Now, other companies have taken different approaches, and we also know that there's no product that is right for 100% of patients, 100% of doctors. But we do believe, based on the data, that we've got a product that will be the place that more doctors start more patients. That being said, despite all of that research that I mentioned, we also took the opportunity to go to school as part of the other launch you mentioned, and despite having what we believe was a good strategy, a good product, there's no substitute for the real world. And so, when we saw that first launch occur, we saw a number of things, and obviously as you can imagine from a case study perspective, there's been an entire post-mortem written on the launch, which is now regarded by the market, including the company that launched it, as an unsuccessful launch. But it was a learning opportunity. And I think, there's a handful of things that we saw. One is that the opportunity is still massive. huge patient demand. Two, you got to have the right product. It's got to be the right asset that meets patients where they are, because presbyopia patients are far less willing to tolerate trade-offs than patients that, for whom you may be treating a sight-threatening condition like glaucoma. And so, again, that tolerability and safety profile has to deliver, because patients aren't willing to trade, one headache for another, so to speak. And then lastly, the model is really important, because one of the things that we found out through research is that the most engaged or the most motivated segment of presbyopia patients tend to be the 45 to 55-year-old working professionals. They're otherwise healthy. They're not going to the doctor for anything other than routine care. They're not at the pharmacy picking up, a range of other medications on a monthly basis. And so the way in which they access the product, again, needs to account for that. And so we started to reimagine, what would it look like to create an access model that says, yes, you need to go see your eye doctor, and most of them already are on a regular basis, more than 60%. But after that, what kind of model could we create to delight and disrupt? And so we borrowed from the likes of, Apple, Amazon, and American Express, and sort of the brands that have really taught us about, customer obsession in delighting patients from the first touch. And so, when we look at the way the other launch was executed, there was a lot of positive. I think, the PR, the excitement that was created around it was really strong. I think the challenge is that the media sort of ran away with the narrative, and also created some unreasonable expectations. If you were watching any of the morning news programs at that time, there was some really, sensational reporting that suggested, that this would replace your reading glasses, a miracle drug, you could throw them away and never need them again. And frankly, two things: one, there's nothing in the data that suggested that was the case. And two, that's not what patients ultimately were looking for. Patients are looking to be empowered. They're looking for flexibility. They're looking for a way in which, they can manage their vision on their terms. And so we've learned a ton from that other launch. And as I mentioned, some of the foundational decisions that we think distinguish Qlosi from, what's been in the market previously or what's in the market currently. First and foremost is formulation. Again, it's a novel low dose formulation. In fact, the lowest concentration of pilocarpine that's ever been approved. Had extremely strong clinical results across our phase 3 studies. Again, more than 700 patients across those studies, that delivered against what, we now regard as functional vision. And so FDA gave us all very clear approvability criteria in terms of lines gained and visual acuity. But as we went out again and talked to patients and talked to doctors, lines gained certainly is a threshold for approval, but ultimately what patients want to know is, I couldn't read without reading glasses before I took the drop. Can I read without reading glasses after I take the drop? And then at what distance and for what activities? And what that led us to analyze is, again, this notion of functional vision, which is, widely regarded as 20/40 or better near visual acuity, which Qlosi delivered for nearly 90% of patients across an 8-hour time period. So we're really excited about the profile, excited about the opportunity to revitalize the category. I love the word you used earlier. I think this very much what it is. The presbyopia as a category is out there. Drops as a modality are still new. The prior launch is kind of gone quiet over the last, 12 plus months. And so we really see the opportunity to seize the moment in partnership with eye care professionals. As I mentioned, lay the right foundation for the category, take a very disciplined and deliberate approach, do the right education, identify the right patients, set the right expectations, and then enter them into a continuum of care for long-term success. So we do think there's a lot different about our approach, but we've benefited from, those who've gone before us. We certainly acknowledge that.
That's great. I mean, and I think that sounds like an incredibly well thought out approach to, how to make this successful. I will tell you that from personal experience, Jay and I are both the same age, I guess. Mm-hmm. And, as both being presbyopes, most of our friends are also presbyopes. When I go out to dinner with all of my friends who are mostly patients, everybody whips out their reading glasses. They'll look at me and they're like, man, you are the worst doctor in the world. Every single one of us is using you as a doctor and we're all still wearing glasses. You suck. And, for years, we haven't had, especially my golf guys, the golf buddies are horrible. They are just vicious. And now we kind of went through the previous product and it, wasn't. So now we have the opportunity when they make fun of me, I say, oh, there's a new product coming. Hopefully, that'll be better. And I can mostly selfishly want them to all be on it so they can leave me alone. But, that's really, kind of exciting for us to have something to treat presbyopia. It is probably the most common complaint of the person that you described, the healthy,
That's right.
middle-aged person coming in for routine eye care. They complain about nothing other than the fact that they need to wear reading glasses. So
That's right. Yeah. In terms of your launch, we're both ophthalmologists, but eye care is bigger than us, right? Eye care is industry, ophthalmology and optometry. So I think there's going to be a shortage of folks like us for sure the next several years. The role of optometry right now, especially in dry eye launches, refractive error launches like yours and presbyopia, and maybe even the role for geographic AMD where these patients sit in general practices, right? The role of optometry has been really immense the last several years in terms of launch strategy. So, can you talk to me about that and talk to us about that a bit?
Yeah, I think, dry eye is a great analog, and I spent several years of, my career in the dry eye space. I think, with the statistics show that 85% of all primary eye care in the U.S. is delivered by optometry. So typically, these patients, when they first acknowledge the onset of presbyopia, are most likely to be seen in that primary eye care setting. But that's just the beginning, and when you think about the continuum and you think about all the other treatments that you have available, whether it's lasers or IOLs, presbyopia correcting or EDOF lenses, this is really the entry point into this continuum of presbyopia care. And one of the things that, that we've heard from advisors is that it's a really great opportunity for a collaborative care approach. The same patients who put their hands up as early presbyopes that are looking to rely upon their reading glasses as little as possible are likely to be the same patients that present in your clinics for surgery later that also want an alternative to, potentially a single distance lens or some other solution that leaves them in need of reading glasses. And so, the first obviously step with the launch is to go where the patients are. And the majority of them are seen in optometry. I mean, our footprint in the field, without getting into the granular details, what we saw with the prior launch is that 80% of all the eye care scripts came from optometry. There's obviously 20% came from ophthalmology. We think we'll see something quite similar here. We also know that there's a tendency to tinker. We know there are other conditions and indications for which pupil modulation may provide a benefit, and we're not speaking to those currently. We are really focused on presbyopia, but we know based on the questions we get and based on the mechanism that Qlosi provides that there'll be other ways that the product is ultimately used. But as it relates to our indication for presbyopia, we'll be overwhelmingly present in optometry, but also in ophthalmology. We're certainly not missing the opportunity to meet those patients that are already in, under the care of an eye doctor wherever they are, whether that's ophthalmology or optometry. But certainly, between those who are currently under the care, then you have an entire group of patients. The data show that about 87% of emmetropic presbyopes don't have an eye doctor at all. And so presbyopia is actually the first sign of any sort of condition. And so one of the things that we'll be doing is also going into the market and activating those patients. So there'll be, many of them will be seeking care from an eye doctor for the very first time, which is another great opportunity to expand access, again, to enter these, in many cases, these plano presbyopes into a lifetime continuum of care with an eye doctor. And certainly we're excited to be a part of that.
yeah, as a glaucoma specialist, those are my favorite patients, by the way. Like they come in, they don't have any complaints. They're like, I can't see up close. And I'm like, great, you don't have any disease and there's nothing I could do for you. So great. It's like the fastest, easiest patient I have. But listen, Paul, I would love to continue this dialogue. Obviously, we're a little bit short on time now, but I'm excited. I think that, we kind of agree. And even as Jay and I were talking before this interview, that we kind of feel like we have a real shot here to get something to patients that will work and will like. And again, not to disparage the previous product because there were some patients who loved it, but
That's right.
you're right. There are definite advantages to what you're doing here. And I think that the approach is a smart one. We're looking forward
We wish you well.
seeing your reps and having them in our office and getting this to patients. And I would like a whole box for my golf buddies if possible, so I can, get them off my back, but exciting, and congratulations on the success. So on behalf of the OIS podcast audience, thank you for taking the time. Orasis and Qlosi are out there, and we're looking forward to seeing you in our offices soon.
Outstanding. Thanks again to you both. Appreciate the opportunity.
Congratulations, Paul.
All right, take care.
Be well.
Thank you.